Of course, there's really only one subject on the news agenda today, and that is the Iranian attacks on Israel. More than 300 drones and cruise missiles were launched against Israel overnight. They were supposed to hit Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other targets sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Now, the Israeli Defence Force and the Iron Dome and British and American planes, and it is also rumoured, and I haven't been able to establish the truth of this yet, it's rumoured that Jordanian and Saudi planes also took part in this to try and prevent these drones from actually landing on Israeli territory. According to the IDF, 99% of them were shot down, only 1% got through, so that's probably fewer than 10 drone attacks came through, causing very little damage. So if you want to look at it one way, you could say, well, it was a damp squib. It was a complete failure. But the symbolism of Iran launching so many drones and missiles on the state of Israel cannot be ignored. Now, the question that I think everyone is thinking about now is, well, what does Israel do in response? Because the Iranians say, well, we did this in response to the killing of somewhere between 5 and 7 Revolutionary Guard members at the Damascus consulate of Iran a couple of weeks ago. Now, people say, well, that broke international law. The Iranians were, in some ways, understandably furious about that. So this was in response to that. Now, if Israel now responds again to this attack overnight, are we heading for a wider Middle Eastern conflict? I think that is the question on everybody's lips. Now, President Biden overnight has made very clear that America will not support any retaliation by Israel for the Iranian acts overnight. So I want to get your views as to what should happen now. Do you think that cool heads will prevail in Israel? Or, as Andy in Edinburgh says, sadly, the Israeli PM needs war to keep him in power. Now, I think there is some truth in that. What do you think Netanyahu will do? What do you think Netanyahu should do? And what's your reaction to these attacks from Iran? 0345 6060 973. Shashank Joshi is defence editor at The Economist. Shashank, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
It's so difficult to predict what might happen next here, but what are the pressures on the Israeli Prime Minister?
Well, he's got to contend with the fact that this is in some ways, as you just said, a groundbreaking attack. For many, many years, Iran and Israel have avoided direct confrontation. They've attacked each other through their proxies or through covert means. This is a crossing of the Rubicon, and not least the scale of it, but just the fact of it. And we've talked a lot about drones. You mentioned drones quite a few times there, Iain. A third of the projectiles, a third of the 331 weapons that were fired at Israel were ballistic missiles, surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, which travel much faster. They are much harder to intercept. They're probably the ones that got through. So although this was a very calibrated attack in some ways, in the sense that it was telegraphed for 10 days, giving Israel time to move things out of the way, giving Israel time to marshal a coalition of allies led by the US to shoot these things down. And my understanding, Ian, is that, yes, Jordan did shoot these things down, not least because they were crossing its airspace. I think that no Israeli leader could leave this unanswered. But the hope is that because this was such a calibrated attack by Iran, because it had such little lethal effect, that actually he can confine himself to what he would in turn describe as a kind of symbolic attack, perhaps the strike on Iranian facilities in the region, Iranian personnel, but not a full-fledged attack on the Iranian regime that I think the Americans will be so gravely concerned about at this time.
And Netanyahu's position politically within Israel is quite interesting, isn't it? And I just wonder, with his own, who knows what his own thought processes are, but he's a great survivor. And he is very unpopular in many quarters in Israel at the moment. But of course, if there was a wider conflict, a wider war, he could use that effectively to say, well, you can't get rid of me. I'm the Prime Minister. I'm the war leader. I'm staying.
Yes, he could say that, but of course he's got other options and other concerns, foremost amongst them being an operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. I'm sure you've been talking about on your show for many weeks now, which would be a huge operation. The Americans don't want it. Netanyahu does want it. And then in addition to that, there's also the question of what to do in Lebanon, where Hezbollah is in the south of the country threatening Israel's northern communities. And the threat of an Israeli attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon is the other big question. Both of those are other possibilities that Netanyahu may look to in order to preserve his grip on power for slightly longer against his rivals. I think he knows, however, that he has stretched relations with the United States to breaking point. Last night, again, we saw Biden show the Israeli public that he is an absolutely staunch ally. And what that means is Biden has built up a lot of goodwill in Israel. For Netanyahu to tell him to go screw himself at this critical juncture when American air defense systems are protecting Israel, the ships are off the coast of the Israeli coast in the Med, I think that would be very, very difficult indeed. So for all those political challenges, I think that he's got to balance that against really keeping this alliance intact and stopping it from collapsing.
And just before I let you go, just set this in the context of the attack on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard at the consulate in Damascus a couple of weeks ago, which killed two very, very senior generals who were effectively directing Iran's operations with Hezbollah and, it is said, Hamas as well. Just tell us exactly what happened there, because I know we're going to get a lot of calls from people saying, well, of course, you can't expect Iran just to sit back and take that. Tell us exactly what happened there.
Well, my understanding is that these diplomatic facilities were being used by the Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is a kind of paramilitary arm of the Iranian state. It's not the regular military. It's the one that does all the external operations in the Middle East, supporting groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen. And these very senior commanders, you might think of them by analogy as kind of the head of the SAS or something like that, were using these facilities, Israel says, to plot attacks and prepare attacks against Israel. So, yes, Israel did violate all conventions against the protection of diplomatic facilities, but that's how Israel operates. It's willing to push the boundary in the pursuit of defeating its enemies, and it often deals with the diplomatic and political fallout after the fact, rather than worrying about it too much beforehand. We see this again and again and again in Israeli history.
We should just point out also that Iran is not exactly a respecter of embassies, given that it encouraged Iranians to invade the British embassy in Tehran in 2011, and we all remember the American embassy siege back in 1979.
That's of course. I mean, the problem here it really is, and I could give you other examples. Of course, we've seen Iranian diplomats in Europe involved in assassination plots. That's true. That's all true. I think the problem comes that what people need to understand is this isn't just the morality of it. It isn't just goodies and baddies and kind of what's right and wrong. There are rules that have built up in the region over years, tacit rules, unspoken sometimes, but mutually understood. For example, when Israel and Lebanon strike each other, Israel and Hezbollah strike each other, in the past they often did so in disputed territory in the north, the Golan Heights, which is occupied by Israel, claimed by Lebanon, of course, as its own territory. And those things may be lost to outsiders. Each side shows a degree of restraint that may not be apparent until you look into the details. And one aspect of that restraint has probably been don't fight each other directly, as happened yesterday. And another aspect has been don't strike embassies or consulates in this way. So what we are seeing, I think, since October 7th, in a very disturbing way, bit by bit across the board, is a steady breakdown of many of these old tacit rules and understandings. And I think that makes the whole situation so much more unpredictable and dangerous.
Shashank, we could not have had a better guest to kick off our programme. Thank you very much indeed. That's Shashank Joshi, defence editor at The Economist. Now, Seth J. Frantzman is a journalist with the Jerusalem Post who's currently in Jerusalem working with the Foundation for Defence of Democracy think tank. Seth, very good morning to you. What's the atmosphere like in Jerusalem this morning?
Good morning to you. It's very, very quiet here. I mean, basically, most of the country has been told to stay away from large gatherings, and all of the schools have been closed as well. So most people are at home, and lots of people are not going out so much. But I think also there's a sense that the big attack last night is kind of been wrapped up. It's not clear if there will be more escalation, but there is certainly not a lot of messaging currently that there will be escalation. So I think people are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief.
And I mean, I described these attacks last night as a damp squib, given that very few of the missiles or drones got through and very little damage was caused. Is that the general feeling in Israel this morning?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is an unprecedented attack. 300 drones and ballistic missiles. I think it's the largest number of drones probably ever fired at one time in a war scenario against another country. So I think, a lot of people here were sent into shelters with their kids scrambling around 1 or 2 in the morning, and then they had to listen to huge explosions over their heads in some parts of the country. So I think, people take it very seriously, and it is the first time that Iran has directly attacked Israel itself. I think that Israelis are, of course, very proud of their air defenses and the fact that, as you noted before, I think, 2/3 of these or so were intercepted by Israeli air defenses and the other third or so by Israel's partners and allies. But I think people see this as a serious escalation. And, it also comes in the context of October 7th, that Israel has lived through 6 months of trauma after seeing 1,000 people massacred and, 250 taken hostage.
What pressure is there on Netanyahu to take further action against Iran after this? Because if he does, it will be going directly against the United States and could risk a wider Middle Eastern war.
Right. I mean, I think there will be, some public, open political pressure. Certainly we've already heard, definitely on the right, of people saying that, Israel should retaliate somehow. I think there's broad support for Israel to do something. I mean, definitely the idea that a country can, launch a massive attack like this and not pay some sort of a price. I think, the question, of course, is what kind of retaliation that looks like, or whether, Israel should take the initiative faster rather than wait, because the longer that Israel waits, the longer that Israel will probably be perceived somehow as being the aggressor, even though it's not. So, but Israel faces a multi-front war. I mean, Iran openly said last night that it was attacking from 4 fronts, including, Hezbollah in the north, which has carried out thousands of attacks, as well as the Houthis in Yemen and this Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. So there's a lot of options out there that Israel has to contend with that it already has basically had to contend with over the last 6 months or years.
Seth, thank you very much indeed. That's Seth Frantzman there.